Hello, thanks for joining us again. This week's topic is self-help and how we can teach our learners new and functional skills. Self-help includes personal care, eating skills, grooming, dressing and chores around the home. These skills are so important for our learners so that they can become as independent as possible. The method of teaching that you're going to see in this video is chaining. It's an effective method of teaching skills that are broken down to smaller steps that take you to the end result. In this video, the end result is going to be clean hands. These smaller steps are what we're going to focus on when we're teaching a learner who doesn't know how to perform these skills independently. But before you start teaching these skills, it's important to think about the small steps that make up the whole skill. You can make a note of these steps so you can identify where in the process or chain your learner gets stuck. These are going to be the steps that we'll be working on. Reinforcement is going to be what brings these new skills into our learners' repertoires, so it's good to have some options for items or actions that you can deliver when teaching these self-help skills. These could be something like bubbles, tickle, social praise, or a few seconds of a song that they like. Another important thing to remember is not to say anything during the chain. This is so that our learners don't become dependent on our vocals throughout the process. The goal is for them to complete the entire chain without our help and independently. Once your learner is consistently independent in performing the new step, then you can begin to work on the next step and the teaching process begins again. Now, let's see the different ways that you can teach these skills.
Hello, for this example we're going to be looking at using forward chaining to teach the self-help skill of washing hands. Now usually with forward chaining the learners can either do some of the first steps of the chain independently or maybe they can't do any of the steps yet. With forward chaining we want to teach one step at a time and we're going to start off with that first step of the chain. Once they can do this step independently we'll then move on to the second step and so on and so forth until they can complete all of the steps of the chain independently. Now where possible we want to end on the step that they're working on and we want to reinforce that straight away. We then want to complete the rest of the steps for them and that's going to lessen the response effort. However, it's not always possible in some tasks such as hand washing, so for this example I'm going to prompt my learner to complete those remaining steps. Now there's a number of different ways I can prompt my learner. I can use a full physical prompt which would be like a hand over hand. I could use a partial physical prompt, so maybe I kind of touch their elbow and guide them over to the tap. Or I could use a gestural prompt, so maybe I can point to the soap when it's time for them to pump the soap in their hands. It's really important that we use a prompt that means that that learner is going to be successful at that step, but also we want to try and fade back on our prompts so that our learner can learn to be more independent. The ultimate aim is that our learners are going to be able to do these skills completely independently and without us being there. So for this example, Chris is going to learn to go and wash his hands after he's been to the toilet. So he's previously learned to flush the chain, walk to the sink, turn on the tap, put his hands under the water. He's now working on the step of pumping that soap onto his hands. So I'm going to let him do all of those first steps independently, and when he gets to the step he's working on, I'm going to give him a couple of seconds to see if he can do it independently. If he doesn't respond, or if he goes to make a mistake, I'm going to prompt him so that he is successful, and then I'm going to reinforce there, and then I'm going to physically prompt him to do the remaining steps. Now I can use some additional reinforcement at the end of the chain. So in this example, what you're going to see is me reinforce using social praise on the step because Chris finds social praise reinforcing. And then at the end of the chain, I'm also going to use the iPad. So now let's go and have a little look to see what that looks like. That's it, good job, well done. Well done washing your hand, that was brilliant, you got the iPad.
In summary, this is how you teach the steps in a forward chain. Begin teaching the first step, and then either you do the remaining steps for them or prompt the learner to complete them. Once they are competent at completing that first step independently, then you can start working on the second step. Continue teaching in this way for the entire chain.
Hi, so for this example we're going to be using backward chaining to teach the self-help task to wash hands. We typically would use backward chaining for learners who can either complete some of the last steps of the chain independently or who may engage in some form of challenging behaviour when tasks are too difficult. As you can probably guess from the name, backward chaining is the opposite to forward chaining. We teach the last step first, then the second to last, and so on until they can complete all of the steps in order independently. With backward chaining and learners who engage in challenging behaviour, usually I would want to complete all of the first steps of the chain for them and only bring them in to teach them the step that they're working on and reinforce there. This will reduce the response effort and therefore the likelihood that they're going to engage in challenging behaviour to escape. Obviously, with tasks such as washing hands, this is impossible to do. So, for this example, I'm going to physically prompt my learner through the first steps of the chain to make it easy for them, then fade my prompts on the last step that we're working on and reinforce here. It's been said already, but it's really important, we're going to avoid all vocal prompts when teaching self-help skills. This may feel unnatural to start with, but it will mean that our learners don't become reliant on us nagging them. For example, being like, turn the tap on, don't forget the soap. We want our learners to complete these tasks without us having to be present so that they can be as independent as possible. Sometimes with tasks, it's important that they can understand that first instruction. For example, if it were dinner time, I could say, can you go wash your hands for dinner please? And they'd know what that means and be able to do it independently. But other times, we want them to know when to wash their hands. For example, when they finish on the toilet, they need to know to wash their hands without being told. And in this example, Will's going to cook me dinner. I want him to know that he needs to wash his hands before he prepares food without having to be told by me every time. Yeah, that's it. Nice clean hands. So, for Will, social praise is enough to be reinforcing and the prospect of making me a lovely dinner. To summarise, this is how you teach the steps in a backward chain. You teach the last step first and not move on to the step before that until they can complete it both fluently and independently.
Finally, we're going to demonstrate how to teach a total task chain to teach the self-help skill of washing hands. Total tasks are then generally used when the learners can already complete some of the steps throughout the chain independently, but may need some help filling in the gaps or performing them in the correct order. It's helpful to make a note of which steps you know they can already complete independently. Then you're going to allow them to perform these and only provide prompts for the steps they struggle on. For an example, I'm going to ask my daughter to wash her hands for dinner to teach her how to follow this instruction. She's nearly mastered this task, so I'm just going to provide a minimal gestural prompt for the steps she struggles to remember. Come and wash your hands for dinner. Well done! With total tasks, we focus on all of the steps the learner cannot already complete until they can independently perform the whole chain.
So for this week's topic, we looked at teaching self-help skills using the method of teaching called chaining. Chaining breaks down the skill into smaller steps and are sequenced together, making a chain. We have looked at 3 different ways of teaching our learners the chain to wash their hands. The first method was forward chaining, starting at the beginning of the chain and reinforcing at the end of the step being taught, progressing forward to teach the next step of the chain, and so on. The second method we looked at was backward chaining, which consisted of working on the last step within the chain, working backwards through the steps. This method is usually good to use for learners who may find long tasks difficult or who may want to escape the task. The final method we looked at was total tasks, which consists of teaching the learner the steps within the chain they may need help with completing, or helping the learner to complete the skill in a specific sequence. This method is a good method to use if the learner is already demonstrating many steps within the chain. When using these 3 methods of teaching, it is important to avoid saying anything to our learners, for example, turn the tap off, pick up the soap, etc. We don't want our learners to become dependent on us vocally telling them to do the steps throughout the chain. We want our learners to complete the chain independently. Remember to think about the reinforcement you are using when teaching these steps, especially if the learner finds the task difficult. Additional reinforcement may be required at the end of the chain. Other examples of skills taught using these methods include daily living skills such as brushing teeth, making a snack, putting on a coat, and many, many more. As stated earlier, we can teach our learners using chaining to wash their hands. We have identified the specific behaviours involved in order to chain these behaviours together into a sequence to teach. When looking at teaching other skills, we need to identify the specific behaviours required to complete the skill, as well as the sequence in which they are performed. To do this, we could observe a competent individual performing the skill or perform the skill ourselves. Let's look at the skill of making a drink and see what this would look like. In this example, the cup and the cauldron are already situated somewhere near the sink area. So the first step would be to walk to sink, pick up cup, put cup on side, pick up cauldron, unscrew lid, put lid down, pour cauldron into cup, pour correct amount, put cauldron down, turn on tap, pick up cup, put cup under water, fill cup to the top, put cup down and turn off water. All these behaviours are required and demonstrated in a specific order to successfully make a drink. So let's look at the skill of buckling up a belt. The behaviours and sequencing they are performed in would look like this. Grasp belt in left hand, grasp buckle in right hand, feed belt through buckle, pull back belt, pull to correct tension, using right hand, push prong through hole, feed through hole. Once these behaviours are identified, we can chain them together and teach them using one of the three methods discussed in this week's topic. Forward chaining, backward chaining or total task, depending on which steps the learner can already complete. Finally, let's look at one more example of identifying behaviours and the sequence in which they are performed for making the perfect martini, alcoholic or non-alcoholic depending on your preference. So the behaviours would look like this. Place a martini glass into the freezer for 15 minutes. Place ice cubes into the cocktail shaker. Pour 4 ounces of vodka, gin or white grape juice into the cocktail shaker. Pour 1/4 teaspoon of the vermouth into the cocktail shaker. Stir with stainless steel spoon or stirrer. Remove martini glass from freezer. Pierce 1 olive onto a toothpick. Place the olive into the glass. Pour the contents of the cocktail shaker through the strainer to catch the ice into the martini glass. Finally, sit down and sip slowly. Hope you have enjoyed watching and thanks for watching. See you next time.